The blood had barely dried on the stage coach bench when Zara Thompson opened her eyes to a world that would never be the same again. The July heat of 1878 pressed down on Valentine, Nebraska, like a heavy blanket, and through her blurred vision, she could see the shattered remains of what had been her family's coach lying in pieces along the ravine. Her father's body still trapped beneath the wreckage while her mother's lifeless hand reached toward nothing at all. She tried to move, tried to scream, but her legs refused to obey, and the only sound that emerged was a thin whimper that dissolved into the prairie wind. Mason Northwood had been tracking a runaway mare when he heard the crash echo across the valley. He spurred his gelding forward, his weathered hands gripping the reins tight as he navigated the steep decline toward the overturned coach. At 26, he had seen his share of accidents on these rough Nebraska roads, but nothing quite prepared him for the scene that greeted him. Two bodies, clearly beyond help, and a young woman with copper hair matted with blood, her green eyes wide with shock and pain. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with purpose as he assessed the situation with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned early that hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. "Can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. His voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that commanded attention without demanding it. Zara's eyes focused on his face, taking in the strong jaw covered with days of stubble, the concerned brown eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her feel seen even in her worst moment. "My parents," she managed to whisper. "I know," Mason said gently. "I am real sorry, miss, but right now we need to get you to town. Can you move?" She tried again, willing her legs to respond, but they remained still and unfeeling. The realization hit her like a second crash, and tears began streaming down her dusty cheeks. "I cannot feel my legs," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. Mason's expression darkened with concern, but he did not waste time with platitudes. "I am going to lift you now. It might hurt, but we have got to get you to Doc Peterson." He slipped his arms beneath her with surprising gentleness for a man with such calloused hands, and when he lifted her against his chest, she felt the solid strength of him, smelled the mixture of leather and sage that clung to his shirt. She had never been carried by a stranger before, had never been carried by anyone since she was a small child, and the vulnerability of it made her want to disappear. The ride into Valentine seemed to take hours, though in reality, it was less than 30 minutes. Mason held her carefully on his horse, one arm secured around her waist while the other controlled the reins. She drifted in and out of consciousness, but every time she surfaced, she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her shoulder, heard his low voice murmuring reassurances that she barely understood but somehow needed to hear. Dr. Robert Peterson was a practical man who had served the town of Valentine since its founding 5 years earlier. He took one look at Zara's condition and immediately cleared his examination table, directing Mason to lay her down carefully. After a thorough examination that involved poking and prodding her legs with various instruments while asking her repeatedly if she could feel anything, the doctor stepped back with a grim expression. "Young lady, I am afraid the news is not good," he said, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. "The fall has damaged your spine. In all my years of practice, I have never seen anyone recover from this type of injury. You will never walk again." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zara stared at the ceiling, unable to process what she was hearing. "Never walk again." The phrase repeated itself in her mind, each repetition stripping away another layer of the future she had imagined for herself. She was only 22 years old, had been on her way to visit her aunt in Omaha, had dreamed of maybe meeting someone there, settling down, having a family. How could any of that happen now? What about her people? Mason asked from where he stood by the door. He had not left, even though his duty was technically done. Her parents did not make it, the doctor said quietly. I will need to send word to any relatives. My aunt, Zara said, her voice hollow. Henrietta Thompson in Omaha. She is my only family now. Dr. Peterson nodded and made a note. I will send a telegram immediately. In the meantime, you will need to stay here where I can monitor you. You have other injuries that need tending, though none as serious as your spine. Mason shifted his weight, his hat in his hands. Does she need anything? Anything I can get for her? The question surprised Zara enough that she turned her head to look at him. He was just a stranger, someone who had happened upon her tragedy by chance. He had no obligation to her, no reason to care beyond basic human decency. Yet something in his expression told her his concern went deeper than that. She needs rest, the doctor said, and time. Though I suspect time will not improve her condition much. After Mason left, Zara lay in the small room at the back of the doctor's office and tried to imagine what her life would look like now. The picture that formed was bleak and gray, a series of days spent lying in bed or sitting in a chair, dependent on others for every basic need. She had always been independent, had helped her father run his freight business, had learned to handle horses and manage accounts. Now she could not even walk to the window. The telegram brought her aunt to Valentine 3 days later. Henrietta Thompson was a rail, thin woman of 50 with sharp features and sharper opinions. She swept into the doctor's office like a force of nature, assessed her niece's condition with cool efficiency, and immediately began making plans. You will come to Omaha with me, she announced. I have a small house, and my church ladies can help me care for you. It is not ideal, but what choice do we have? Zara wanted to protest, wanted to say she would find her own way, but what could she say? She had no home now, no parents, no means of supporting herself. She was entirely dependent on charity, and the bitterness of that realization tasted like ash in her mouth. When can she travel? Henrietta asked the doctor. Give her another week to heal from the other injuries, Dr. Peterson said. But I will be honest with you, moving her will be difficult. She will need to be carried, and the train station is not exactly equipped for someone in her condition. I will manage it, Henrietta said with the confidence of someone who had managed far more difficult things in her life. But when the day came for Zara to leave, it was not her aunt who carried her to the waiting wagon. Mason appeared at the doctor's office just as Henrietta was trying to figure out the logistics of getting her niece down the front steps. I can help, he said simply. Henrietta looked him up and down with obvious skepticism. And who might you be, Mason Northwood, madam? I am the one who found your niece and brought her to town. Something in Henrietta's expression softened slightly. I see. Well, I suppose we could use the assistance. Mason moved past her and into the room where Zara sat in a chair by the window, dressed in a borrowed dress since her own clothes had been ruined in the accident. She had been staring out at the dusty street, watching life go on without her, and she did not look up when he entered. Miss Thompson, he said gently, I am here to help you to the wagon. I am quite capable of being carried by any number of people, she said, her voice brittle with forced indifference. You need not trouble yourself. He knelt down beside her chair so he could look up into her face. It is no trouble, he said, and I reckon I have carried you before, so we already know it works. Despite herself, Zara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was the closest she had come to one since the accident. You are very persistent, Mr. Northwood. I prefer to think of it as dependable, he said, and then he was lifting her again, his arms secure and sure beneath her knees and shoulders. She had lost weight in the past week, could feel how her dress hung looser on her frame, but he did not seem to notice or care. He carried her as if she weighed nothing at all. The street was busy with afternoon traffic, and Zara felt every eye turn toward them as Mason carried her to the wagon. The attention made her skin crawl, made her want to hide her face against his chest, but she forced herself to keep her chin up and her gaze straight ahead. She would not be ashamed, even if the pity in people's eyes said she should be. He settled her carefully on the wagon bench, arranging her skirts so they covered her useless legs. Henrietta was already climbing up to take the reins when Mason stepped back. "Safe travels," he said, tipping his hat to both of them. Henrietta nodded brusquely and clicked the horses forward. Zara turned to look back at Mason, who stood in the street watching them go, and something in her chest twisted painfully. He had been kind to her when he had no reason to be, and she had not even properly thanked him. The ride to the train station took 20 minutes, and by the time they arrived, Zara's body was screaming in protest. Every bump in the road sent jolts of pain through her back and shoulders, reminding her of injuries that were still healing. When Henrietta stopped the wagon and began looking around for help, Zara closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for the indignity of being hauled around by strangers again. "Need some help there, madam?" Zara's eyes flew open at the familiar voice. Mason stood beside the wagon, his gelding tied to a nearby post. "What are you doing here?" Henrietta demanded, though her tone suggested she was more relieved than annoyed. "I figured you might need assistance getting her on the train," Mason said. "Those conductors can be particular about their schedules, and they do not much like waiting." Without waiting for permission, he reached up and lifted Zara from the wagon. This time she let herself relax against him, let herself acknowledge how safe she felt in his arms. It was foolish, she knew, to feel anything for a man she barely knew, a man she would probably never see again after today. But her heart seemed to have missed that particular memo. The train platform was crowded with travelers, and Mason had to navigate carefully through the press of bodies. A few people stared, and one woman actually gasped and clutched her companion's arm, as if the sight of a paralyzed woman was too shocking to bear. Zara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Do not mind them," Mason murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "They are just ignorant." "They pity me," she said. "Maybe," he agreed, "but pity says more about them than it does about you." The train conductor was indeed impatient, tapping his pocket watch and glaring as Mason carried Zara aboard. Henrietta had purchased tickets for a private compartment, which was a small mercy. At least, Zara would not have to endure hours of stares from other passengers. Mason settled her on the cushioned bench, and Henrietta bustled in with their bags, already talking about what they would do once they reached Omaha. But Zara was not listening. She was looking at Mason, trying to memorize the planes of his face, the exact shade of his brown eyes, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. "Thank you," she said, interrupting her aunt mid-sentence. "For everything. I know I have not been particularly gracious, but I do appreciate what you have done for me." Mason's expression was unreadable. "You do not owe me thanks," he said. "Any decent person would have done the same." "Perhaps," she said, "but you are the one who did it." The train whistle blew, signaling imminent departure. Henrietta made a shooing motion at Mason, and he reluctantly stepped toward the door, but at the last moment he turned back. "Miss Thompson," he said, "I hope things work out for you in Omaha. I truly do." Then he was gone, and the train was moving, and Zara was watching through the window as Valentine. Nebraska disappeared into the distance, taking with it the one person who had made her feel like something other than a burden. Life in Omaha was exactly as bleak as Zara had imagined. Henrietta's house was small and cramped, with narrow doorways that made navigating in the wheeled chair the doctor had provided nearly impossible. The church ladies came by regularly, bringing casseroles and prayers and thinly veiled curiosity. They would sit in the parlor, sipping tea, and talking about Zara as if she were not right there, discussing her condition and her prospects with the detached interest of people observing an unfortunate but ultimately distant tragedy. "Such a shame, Mrs. Pemberton said one afternoon, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "So young and pretty too, but I suppose there is always hope for a miracle." "Miracles are for the faithful," Mrs. Whitmore added, casting a meaningful look at Zara. "Perhaps if she prayed more earnestly." Zara bit her tongue and said nothing. What was the point? These women did not care about her faith or her prayers. They cared about the story they could tell at their next gathering, about how they had visited the poor, crippled girl and felt appropriately charitable. Henrietta, to her credit, did her best. She carried Zara when necessary, though her thin frame struggled under the weight, and she never complained about the additional work her niece's presence created. But there was no warmth in her care, no affection. Henrietta had taken Zara in out of duty, and duty was all she provided. 3 months passed. Autumn arrived, painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson that Zara could only observe from her window. She had tried to make herself useful, offering to do mending or help with cooking from her chair, but most tasks proved impossible from her limited position. She felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and more invisible with each passing day. Then, on a cold October morning, there was a knock at the door. Henrietta answered it, and Zara heard a familiar deep voice that made her heart perform an acrobatic leap in her chest. "Morning, madam. I am looking for Miss Zara Thompson. I was told she was staying here." "And who are you?" Henrietta demanded. "Mason Northwood. I brought her to the doctor in Valentine after her accident." There was a long pause, and then Henrietta was ushering him into the parlor where Zara sat in her chair, a blanket covering her legs against the autumn chill. She stared at him in disbelief, unable to reconcile his presence here with the last 3 months of gray monotony. "Mr. Northwood," she said, her voice coming out more breathless than she intended. "What are you doing here?" He held his hat in his hands, looking suddenly uncertain in a way she had not seen before. "I have been thinking," he said, "about you, about your situation, and I have a proposition for you if you will hear it." Henrietta crossed her arms. "What sort of proposition?" Mason kept his eyes on Zara. "I have a ranch about 15 miles outside of Valentine. It is not much, but it is mine, and it is doing well enough. I could use help with the business side of things, the books and orders and such. I understand you used to help your father with his freight business." "I did," Zara said slowly, not sure where this was going. "Well, I need someone who can do that work, and you need a place where you can be useful, where you can have a purpose beyond sitting in a parlor all day." He took a breath. "I am offering you a job, Miss Thompson. Room and board, plus a fair wage. You would have your own room, your privacy. I would not expect anything from you except your work." The offer hung in the air like something shimmering and fragile. Zara's mind raced through the implications. Leave her aunt's house, go back to Nebraska, work for a man she barely knew. It was scandalous, inappropriate, potentially dangerous. It was also the most appealing thing anyone had suggested in months. "Absolutely not," Henrietta said before Zara could respond. "It would not be proper. A young, unmarried woman living on a ranch with a bachelor. The scandal alone would be devastating." "I have a housekeeper," Mason said. "Mrs. Kelly, a widow who lives in the main house and manages the cooking and cleaning. She would serve as chaperone. Everything would be completely respectable." "Respectable?" Henrietta scoffed. "There is nothing respectable about this arrangement." "With respect, madam," Mason said, his voice taking on an edge. "What is not respectable is letting your niece waste away in a chair when she has skills and abilities that could be put to use. She may not be able to walk, but her mind is sharp, and she deserves the chance to use it." Zara found herself sitting up straighter, found herself feeling something that had been dormant for months beginning to wake up inside her. He was right. She was wasting away here, becoming a ghost of herself. The idea of having real work again, of being needed for something beyond pity and prayers, was intoxicating. "I want to do it," she said, her voice clear and firm. Henrietta turned to her in shock. "Zara, you cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," Zara said. "Mr. Northwood is right. I need purpose. I need to feel useful. And I appreciate everything you have done for me, Aunt Henrietta, truly I do. But this is not living. This is just existing." For a moment, Henrietta looked like she might argue further. But then something in her expression shifted, and Zara realized with a pang that her aunt was actually relieved. Taking care of an invalid niece had been a burden, one that Henrietta had shouldered out of obligation rather than love. This offer was an escape for both of them. "Very well," Henrietta said stiffly. "If you are determined to do this, I will not stand in your way, but do not expect to come running back here when it does not work out." "I will not need to," Zara said with more confidence than she felt. The journey back to Valentine took 2 days by train, and then wagon. Mason had arranged everything with quiet efficiency, purchasing the tickets, coordinating their arrival, even bringing extra blankets for Zara since the October weather was turning cold. He carried her on and off the train without complaint, his strong arms never wavering even when she knew she must be getting heavy. "You do not have to do this every time," she said during one of these transfers. "I can learn to manage with crutches or something." "The doctor said your arms are not strong enough yet to support your full weight," Mason replied. "And besides, I do not mind." "You should mind," she insisted. "I am not your responsibility." He looked down at her then, his brown eyes serious. "Maybe I want you to be." The words sent a flutter through her chest that had nothing to do with being carried and everything to do with the implication behind them. But before she could respond, they were at the wagon, and he was settling her on the bench, and the moment passed. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was more beautiful than Zara had imagined. Rolling grassland stretched in every direction, dotted with grazing cattle and bounded by distant hills that glowed amber in the afternoon light. The house itself was a sturdy 2-story structure built from golden wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as they pulled up, the front door opened to reveal a plump woman with gray hair and a welcoming smile. "You must be Miss Thompson," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am Martha Kelly. Mr. Northwood has told me all about you." "Has he?" Zara said, glancing at Mason with raised eyebrows. Martha laughed. "Well, perhaps not all, but enough that I have your room ready and supper waiting. You must be exhausted from your travels." Mason carried Zara inside, and she found herself in a spacious main room with comfortable furniture and large windows that let in floods of natural light. Everything was clean and well maintained, and there was a warmth to the space that had been entirely lacking from her aunt's house. Her room was on the ground floor, which Mason explained had originally been a storage room, but which he had converted in preparation for her arrival. It had its own door that opened onto the back porch, giving her independence and easy access to the outdoors. The bed was large and covered with a colorful quilt, and there was a desk positioned by the window with a view of the western pasture. "I thought you could use the desk for the bookwork," Mason said, setting her carefully in the chair he had positioned there. "All my papers and ledgers are a mess, I am afraid. I have never been good at organizing that sort of thing." Zara ran her hand over the smooth wood of the desk, feeling tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever done something like this for her, had ever made accommodations for her limitations while simultaneously acknowledging her abilities. "It is perfect," she said quietly. "Thank you." That first evening at the ranch set the pattern for the days that followed. Martha served a hearty supper of beef stew and fresh bread, and they ate together at the big kitchen table while Mason explained the workings of the ranch. He had 200 head of cattle, 3 hired hands who lived in the bunkhouse, and contracts with several buyers in Omaha and Kansas City. The problem was keeping track of all the details, the numbers and dates and agreements. That was where Zara came in. She threw herself into the work with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself. Mason brought her his chaotic collection of papers, receipts, and half-finished ledgers, and she began sorting through them with methodical precision. She created systems for tracking expenses and income, designed forms for recording cattle sales, and drafted letters to buyers that were professional and clear. Within 2 weeks, she had brought order to what had been complete chaos. "I do not know how you do it," Mason said one afternoon, looking over the neat columns of numbers in the newly organized ledger. "It would have taken me months to sort through all that." "It is not difficult when you know what you are doing," Zara said, though she was pleased by his praise. "My father taught me young. He said a good head for numbers was worth more than a strong back in business." "Your father was a wise man," Mason said. Then, more hesitantly, "Do you miss him? Your parents, I mean." Zara set down her pen and looked out the window at the wide Nebraska sky. "Every day," she admitted, "but the missing has become different somehow, less raw, more like an ache than a wound." "Time does that," Mason said, "makes the pain bearable even when it does not make it disappear." She looked at him curiously. "You sound like you speak from experience." His jaw tightened slightly. "I lost my parents when I was 16. Cholera epidemic. I have been on my own since then, working ranches until I could afford to buy this place 2 years ago." "I am sorry," Zara said. "That must have been terrible." "It was," he agreed. "But it taught me that you can survive things you never thought you could. You are stronger than you know, Miss Thompson." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she could be strong despite her useless legs and her dependence on others. But belief was hard when every morning she woke up and remembered that she would never again run through a field or dance at a social, or do any of the 1,000 simple things she had once taken for granted. As if sensing her thoughts, Mason pulled up a chair and sat down beside her desk. "I want you to know something," he said seriously. "I did not bring you here out of pity. I brought you here because I genuinely need your help and because I think you have value beyond your ability to walk. I know the world wants to make you feel less than whole, but you are not. You are complete exactly as you are." The tears she had been holding back spilled over, and she did not try to stop them. "How can you say that?" she whispered. "I cannot even get out of bed without help. I cannot go to the privy alone, cannot bathe myself, cannot do the most basic tasks without assistance. How is that complete?" "Because those are things your body cannot do," Mason said gently. "They are not who you are. Who you are is smart and capable and brave enough to start over after losing everything. That is what matters." She wiped at her tears with shaking hands. "You barely know me. How can you be so sure?" "Because I have been watching," he said simply. "The way you tackled those ledgers with determination. The way you thank Martha every time she helps you with something. The way you hold your head up even when I know you feel ashamed. Those things tell me who you are." Something shifted between them in that moment. Some unspoken acknowledgement that this was more than an employer and employee relationship. Zara felt it in the way her heart beat faster when he was near, in the way his gaze lingered on her face, in the careful way he always made sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. But she also felt the impossibility of it. What man would truly want a woman who could not walk, who would need to be carried for the rest of her life, who could never be a full partner in the way a wife should be? The thought was both thrilling and heartbreaking. The weeks turned into months, and winter settled over the Nebraska plains with bitter winds and snow that turned the landscape into a white expanse. Zara continued her work on the books, expanding her role to include correspondence with buyers and suppliers. Mason often sat with her in the evenings after supper, discussing plans for the ranch and asking her opinion on various decisions. She found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the way he listened to her ideas and actually implemented them. Martha had become like a grandmother to her, fussing over her health and making sure she ate enough. The older woman was the one who helped her with the personal tasks that Zara found most humiliating, but Martha never made her feel ashamed. She was matter-of-fact and gentle, treating Zara's limitations as simple facts rather than tragedies. But it was Mason who occupied most of Zara's thoughts. She had tried to keep her feelings professional, had tried to remind herself that he was her employer and she was his employee, and that was all this could ever be. But her heart refused to listen. She found herself watching for him to come in from working on the range, found herself wanting to smooth the worry lines from his forehead when the cattle prices dropped, found herself lying awake at night imagining what it would be like if things were different. The truth was inescapable. She was falling in love with him. Maybe had been falling since that first day when he lifted her from the wreckage with such gentle competence. The realization terrified her. Christmas came, and Mason surprised her with a gift. It was a leather-bound journal, the pages creamy and blank, waiting to be filled. "I thought you might want to write," he said, almost shyly. "Martha mentioned you used to keep a journal before the accident." Zara ran her fingers over the smooth leather, feeling overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. "I did," she said. "I had not even realized I missed it until just now." "Well, now you can start again," he said. "Write about whatever you want, your thoughts, your feelings, stories, anything." She looked up at him, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He was looking at her the way she had always dreamed someone might look at her, with tenderness and desire, and something deeper that she was afraid to name. "Mason," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. "Why are you really doing all this? And please do not say it is just because you need help with your books." He pulled up a chair and sat down, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. "The truth," he said. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I found you. I told myself it was just concern for someone who had been through something terrible. But when you left for Omaha, I felt like something had been torn out of me. I tried to forget you, tried to move on with my life, but you were always there in my thoughts." Zara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "So you came to Omaha." "So I came to Omaha," he confirmed. "And I used the books as an excuse, which was cowardly of me. But the truth is, Zara, I wanted you here because I wanted you. Not despite your condition, but just you. The woman who kept her dignity even when the world was falling apart around her. The woman who is brilliant and brave and beautiful." "Beautiful," she repeated, and she could not keep the bitterness from her voice. "Mason, I cannot walk. I will never walk. Do you understand what that means? It means I would need to be carried for the rest of my life. It means I could never be a real wife to anyone, could never run a household properly, could never do the things a woman is supposed to do." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "It means I would get to carry you," he said. and I cannot think of anything I would rather do. As for being a real wife, you are already running this household better than I ever could. You manage the books, coordinate the supplies, even helped Martha organize the kitchen stores last month. You do more from that chair than most people do on 2 legs. But what about children? She whispered, voicing the fear that had been haunting her. What about a family? The doctor said your spine was damaged, not your womb, Mason said. There is no reason you could not carry a child. And as for raising one, I think a child would be lucky to have a mother as smart and determined as you. Tears were streaming down her face again, but this time they were different. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of dreams she had thought were dead beginning to resurrect themselves. I am scared, she admitted. I am so scared of believing this is real. Mason stood and then knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. Then let me be scared with you, he said. Let me prove to you every single day that you are worth everything. I love you, Zara Thompson. I have loved you for months, and I will love you for the rest of my life if you will let me. You love me, she said wonderingly. I love you, he confirmed, and I am asking you to marry me. Not because I pity you or because I want to take care of you like you are some kind of charity case, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You make me better. You make everything better. She looked into his earnest brown eyes and saw nothing but truth there, nothing but love that was real and solid and more precious than anything she had ever been offered. Her fears tried to rise up, tried to tell her all the reasons this could not work, but she pushed them down. Mason was right. She was stronger than she knew, and maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough to believe in happiness again. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, and then he was rising up to kiss her, his lips gentle and reverent against hers. It was her first kiss, and it tasted like salt from her tears and like hope and like coming home. They married in February of 1879, in the small church in Valentine, with Martha serving as witness and the minister's wife playing a slightly out-of-tune piano. Mason carried Zara down the aisle because there was no other way for her to get there, and when the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was complete and affirming. Martha cried happy tears throughout the ceremony, and even the minister's voice wavered with emotion when he pronounced them husband and wife. The wedding night was something Zara had been both anticipating and dreading. She had no experience with intimacy, and her condition added layers of complication and vulnerability to what was already a nerve-wracking prospect. But Mason was patient and gentle, taking his time to learn what pleased her, what made her gasp with pleasure rather than pain. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, and when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that made her weep. I love you, he murmured against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. Every part of you, every single part, even the parts that do not work. She asked, unable to keep the insecurity from her voice. Especially those parts, he said firmly, because they brought you to me, because they are part of what makes you who you are, and who you are is the most extraordinary person I have ever known. Life as Mason's wife settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and wonderfully new. She continued to manage the books and correspondence, but now she also helped plan improvements to the ranch, suggesting ways to diversify their income and expand their operations. Mason listened to all her ideas and implemented most of them, and by spring, they were seeing increased profits that allowed them to hire another ranch hand and invest in better breeding stock. But the best part of being married was the simple intimacy of it. The way Mason kissed her good morning every day before heading out to work. The way he carried her out to the porch in the evenings so they could watch the sunset together. The way he told her about his day while she prepared vegetables for supper from her chair in the kitchen, their conversation flowing easily as if they had known each other forever rather than less than a year. There were hard days, too. Days when Zara felt the weight of her limitations crushing down on her, when she wished desperately that she could walk beside her husband rather than always being carried. Days when she saw other women in town moving freely and felt a jealousy so sharp it stole her breath. On those days, Mason would hold her while she cried and would remind her gently of all the things she could do, all the ways she contributed, all the reasons she was valuable. "You are not less than them," he would say. "You are just different, and different is not bad." In June, Zara realized she had missed her monthly courses twice in a row. At first, she was afraid to hope, afraid to believe that her body could do this one crucial thing after failing so spectacularly at walking. But as the weeks passed, and her body began to change in unmistakable ways, the truth became undeniable. "I am with child," she told Mason one evening as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies emerge. "The doctor confirmed it today." Mason's face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, joy, fear, and then a fierce protective love that made Zara's throat tighten with emotion. "A baby," he said, his voice rough. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy." He laughed and pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly. "Zara, I am more than happy. I am ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic." "Me too," she admitted. "I do not know how I am going to manage, how I am going to take care of an infant when I cannot even walk." "You are going to manage the same way you manage everything else," Mason said confidently. "With intelligence and determination and help from people who love you, we will figure it out together." The pregnancy was not easy. Zara's back, already damaged, protested the additional weight and shifting center of gravity. By her 7th month, the pain was constant and severe enough that the doctor prescribed laudanum, which she refused to take for fear of harming the baby. Mason rigged up a special reclining chair that provided better support, and Martha developed a massage technique that helped ease the worst of the muscle spasms. But through it all, Zara never regretted her condition. Because her condition had brought her to Mason, had given her this life, had made her strong enough to handle whatever challenges came. And besides, she thought, as she felt the baby kick strongly against her ribs, some miracles were worth any amount of pain. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1880, arriving 3 weeks early, and with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being evicted from his warm home. Mason was there for the birth, holding Zara's hand and murmuring encouragement, and when the doctor finally placed the red-faced, squalling infant in his arms, the look on his face was something Zara would treasure forever. "He is perfect," Mason said, his voice choked with emotion. "Zara, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Matthew after Mason's father, and from the moment Zara held him against her chest, she knew that love had no limits. This tiny person, this perfect combination of her and Mason, was worth everything she had survived to reach this moment. The first few months of motherhood were challenging in ways Zara had not anticipated. She could not get up in the night to tend to a crying baby, could not pace the floor to soothe him, could not do the 1,000 things mothers did that required mobility. But she learned to adapt. Mason moved the cradle right beside their bed so she could reach Matthew easily. Martha showed her how to nurse while positioned in her chair. And Mason, wonderful Mason, never complained about the interrupted sleep or the extra work her limitations created. "He is our son," Mason would say when she apologized for the 100th time. "Taking care of him is not a burden, it is a privilege." As Matthew grew from infant to toddler, the household had to adapt again. The curious boy wanted to explore everything, and keeping him safe required creativity. They set up gates to block off dangerous areas, and Mason built a special low table where Zara could work with Matthew on learning his letters and numbers. The boy adored his mother and would spend hours sitting beside her chair, playing with blocks or looking at picture books while she told him stories. "Mama walk?" he asked one day when he was 3, his blue eyes curious. Zara had been dreading this question but had prepared for it. "No, sweetheart, Mama's legs do not work, but that is okay. There are lots of things I can do even without walking." "Papa carry Mama," Matthew observed. "Yes, he does," Zara agreed. "Your papa is very strong." "I be strong too," Matthew declared. "I carry Mama when I big." The innocent statement made Zara's eyes sting with tears, and she pulled her son into her lap for a hug. "You are already strong," she told him. "So very strong." The ranch continued to prosper. Zara's management had helped them weather a difficult drought in 1881, and by 1882 they had expanded their herd to 400 head and were considered one of the more successful operations in the region. Mason credited Zara with much of their success, and she had to admit that her business acumen had served them well. She had also begun corresponding with other ranchers' wives, offering advice on bookkeeping and ranch management, and had developed a small side business providing these services to neighbors who struggled with the administrative side of ranching. "You have turned out to be quite the entrepreneur," Mason teased one evening as she finished a letter to a client. "Maybe I should retire and let you run everything." "You would be bored within a week," Zara said, smiling. "Besides, I like our arrangement. You handle the cattle and I handle the numbers." "Partners," Mason said, coming to stand behind her chair and resting his hands on her shoulders. "Partners," Zara agreed, leaning back into his touch. When Matthew was 4, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because her body knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was less afraid. Their daughter was born in September of 1884, a tiny thing with copper hair like her mother and her father's brown eyes. "Madeline," Zara said when she first held her daughter. "After my mother." Mason kissed Zara's forehead. "Madeline Northwood, it is perfect." With 2 children, the house became even more chaotic and wonderful. Matthew took his role as big brother seriously, always watching out for his little sister and reporting to his mother whenever Madeline got into something she should not have. Zara managed both children from her chair with a combination of patience, creativity, and the help of Martha, who had become an indispensable part of their family. The years flowed by like the North Platte River, steady and constant. Matthew grew tall and strong like his father, already helping with the ranch work by the time he was 10. Madeline proved to have her mother's head for numbers and her father's way with animals. Both children grew up understanding that their mother's limitations were simply part of life, nothing to be ashamed of or pitied. "Why does Mama not walk?" a visiting child asked Madeline once. "Because her legs do not work," Madeline replied matter-of-factly. "But she does not need legs to be the best mama in the world." Zara overheard this exchange and had to excuse herself to her room to cry happy tears. Her children did not see her as less than. They saw her as simply who she was, and that was enough. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason carried Zara out to the top of the hill behind their house, where they could see the whole ranch spread out before them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and in the distance they could see Matthew and Madeline playing near the barn under Martha's watchful eye. "You remember the day I asked you to come here?" Mason asked, his arms secure around his wife. I remember thinking you were either very brave or very crazy, Zara said with a laugh. Maybe both. I was desperate, Mason admitted. I had tried to forget you, but I could not. You had gotten under my skin, into my heart. I knew I had to at least try to have you in my life, even if all you could ever be was my bookkeeper. I am glad you tried, Zara said softly. I am glad you saw something in me worth fighting for, even when I could not see it myself. I saw everything, Mason said. I saw your strength and your courage and your brilliant mind. I saw the woman I wanted to spend my life with, the woman I wanted to build a future with. And I was right. You have given me more happiness than I ever dreamed possible. Zara turned in his arms so she could look up at his face, this face she loved more than anything in the world. You carried me, she said. Not just physically, though you have done that every day without complaint. But you carried me through the darkness, through the fear, through all the moments when I wanted to give up. You showed me that I was not broken, just different, and you loved me anyway. Not anyway, Mason corrected gently. I loved you because of who you are, and your legs have nothing to do with that. I have never carried you because I had to, Zara. I have carried you because I wanted to, because holding you in my arms is one of my greatest joys. She kissed him then, there on the hilltop with the Nebraska wind blowing around them and their children's laughter echoing up from below. And she thought about how the doctor had said she would never walk again, how he had delivered those words like a death sentence. But what he had not understood was that walking was just one way to move through life. There were others. There were strong arms to hold you when you needed holding. There was love that lifted you up even when your legs could not. There was the kind of partnership that made two people stronger together than they ever could have been apart. The years continued their steady march. Matthew grew into a fine young man and eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Madeline went to school in Omaha to study business, then returned to help her mother with the expanding bookkeeping enterprise that now served ranches throughout the region. Martha eventually retired to live with her sister in Kansas City, and by then, Madeline was old enough to help Zara with the personal tasks she still could not manage alone. But mostly, it was still Mason. Mason carrying her out to the porch every morning so she could have her coffee in the fresh air. Mason lifting her onto their bed each night and holding her close as they talked about their day. Mason dancing with her in the kitchen while she sat in her chair and he swayed and turned, humming a melody only they could hear. You ever regret it? She asked him once when they were in their 50s, their hair graying and their bodies showing the wear of time. Marrying someone you had to carry. He looked at her like she had asked if he regretted breathing. Not for one single moment, he said. Carrying you has been the greatest honor of my life. When Mason was 63, he was thrown from a horse while chasing down a spooked calf. He broke several ribs and punctured a lung, and the doctor in Valentine was not optimistic about his chances. Zara had Matthew carry her to Mason's bedside, and she sat there holding his hand while he struggled to breathe. You cannot leave me, she told him fiercely. Do you hear me, Mason Northwood? I have not spent 33 years with you just to lose you now. His eyes opened, and despite the pain he must have been in, he managed a weak smile. Bossy, he rasped. You love it when I am bossy, she said, tears streaming down her face. Love everything about you, he whispered. Then, with what seemed like enormous effort, no regrets, best life. You gave me best life. You gave me life, Zara said. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. He squeezed her hand and closed his eyes, and for a terrible moment she thought he was gone. But then his chest rose and fell again, and she realized he was just resting, gathering his strength. Mason did recover, though it took months. And during those months, it was Zara's turn to be the strong one. managing both the ranch business and coordinating his care, making decisions and keeping everything running smoothly. When he was finally well enough to sit up and take notice, he looked around at how seamlessly everything had continued in his absence and shook his head in wonder. "You did all this?" he asked. "We all did," Zara said. "Matthew and Madeline and me, we are a family, Mason. We take care of each other." "I am supposed to be the one taking care of you," he said, but there was no real protest in his voice. "You have been taking care of me for over 3 decades, Zara pointed out. "Let me return the favor." He reached for her hand. "Still letting me carry you?" "Always," she promised, "for as long as you want to." "Then I will carry you forever," he said, and he did. Even as his hair turned white and his back began to protest the years of lifting and carrying, Mason never stopped. He modified how he did it, sometimes using a special sling he designed, sometimes asking for Matthew's help with the more difficult transfers. But every single day, he made sure Zara got to go wherever she wanted to go, made sure she was never trapped by her inability to walk. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. The house was full of laughter and love, and as Zara looked around at the family they had built together, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she had been given. "I was thinking," Mason said that evening after everyone had gone home and they were alone on the porch, Zara on his lap in the rocking chair he had built special with reinforced supports. "About that day, I found you in the ravine. You looked so small and broken, and I remember thinking I would do anything to take away your pain." "You did," Zara said. "You took away the pain of feeling useless, of feeling like my life was over. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me everything." "No," Mason said, his arms tightening around her. "You gave me everything. You taught me what real strength looks like. You showed me that the measure of a person has nothing to do with what their body can do and everything to do with who they are inside. You made me better, Zara. You made me whole." She kissed him, this man who had carried her through life in every possible way, and she thought about how the doctor had been wrong. She had never walked again after that accident, but she had run businesses and raised children and built a legacy. She had lived fully and loved deeply. She had proven that being unable to walk did not mean being unable to live. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you more," he whispered back. "Impossible," she said. "Want to bet?" he challenged, and she could hear the smile in his voice. They sat there on the porch as the sun set over the ranch they had built together, over the land they had made prosper, over the life they had created from the ashes of tragedy. The Nebraska wind blew gentle and warm, carrying with it the sound of cattle lowing and the distant call of a meadowlark. Mason rocked them slowly, his chin resting on top of Zara's head, and she closed her eyes and listened to the steady beat of his heart. This heart that had chosen her when everyone else had written her off. This heart that had loved her without condition or reservation. The doctor had said she would never walk again, and he had been right about that. But what he had failed to understand was that there were more ways to move through the world than on your own 2 feet. There was being carried by someone who loved you. There was building a life that mattered despite your limitations. There was proving every single day that worth was not measured in steps taken, but in lives touched, in love given, in the quiet courage of simply refusing to give up. Zara had never walked again after that July day in 1878. But she had flown. In Mason's arms, in the work she did, in the family they created together, she had soared higher than her legs ever could have taken her. And that, she thought as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's embrace, was more than enough. That was everything. The end.